And that is how we can quickly build a Django web application with little to no effort. Welcome back to another Python session, everybody. Today we are starting a new video series where we will be building your free website and your free coding portfolios using GitHub Pages. So this starts an extension of the last video I made about how you can make a free website in 45 minutes. And the next 3 videos will be building off of that, going through a step-by-step tutorial on how to build, test, and deploy your Django web applications to GitHub Pages. So for this series, we're going to be building a web application that's for task management. So this is a very common Python experiment or project where you build yourself a to-do list app. And we can do this both locally, so on your personal computer, or through Django. And if you haven't heard of Django before, Django is a web development framework that they say is for the perfectionists with deadlines. But really what Django is this kind of lasagna of how to build an application for the internet. So it has a bunch of different layers. It has the model layer, the view layer, the template layer. It has forms. It's got a whole development process, admin, background security, geolocating, geographic frameworks. You know, there's more and more to it that you always can learn. And luckily, there's great documentation available for the Django project at docs.djangoproject.com. Now, before we start working with Django, one of the things that you need to know is that it uses what we call an MVT framework, or a model view template framework. So what this basically does is allows for the programmer or the software engineer to build a model. And the model is basically a layout of how you want the database to look and what data you're holding. And based off of that data framework, you are providing that data to a view. And that view is what you want to be displayed to a user. So that view is basically a function that you can define. And then that view is taken and implemented using a template. And the template is your HTML file or your Markdown file that can then be displayed to a user. And then that user interacts with the template, and that user input is then fed back to the views, and then the views decides which of the other functions or views you may need access to based off of what the user has input or requested. And then from the views, that accesses the model, and then the model is then implemented and updated based off of the user input. Then that model sends new data out to the views, then the views get sent out to make a new template, and the process repeats. So this model view template format or framework is a very commonly used framework for web development. And a lot of the times, just to be honest with you, it is not this cut and dry. Many times when you're creating a website, you use a bunch of different forms of software engineering frameworks, and you kind of concatenate or add them together to get the view or the approach that you'd like. But for this specific portfolio, we're going to focus on the MVT structure here. And if you've taken my classes before, you should be familiar with this MVT structure. We spent quite a bit of time on Django last semester. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today, we are going to start by setting up our virtual environment. Then we're going to create the Django project framework, and then we're going to start to build our app. And we're just going to build a couple of parts of the apps today. So let's get started. So we're going to start by setting up a virtual environment. Now, in this situation, it's not necessary that we add a virtual environment because we're working out of Google Colab, which is basically a Jupyter notebook with a Python kernel wrapped around it. So this is essentially a free virtual machine in itself. So it is a virtual environment. However, we're going to practice setting up a virtual environment just for good practice, and also that'll allow us to take our exact settings from this notebook and upload them to our GitHub repository, so whoever is looking at this app in your portfolio then can have the exact settings that you use to build the app. So to get started, the first thing we need to do is install the virtual env or the venv package, whichever one you want to use. And to do this, we have to use a reserved character in the Colab environment. So that reserved character for us is the exclamation mark. The exclamation basically tells the virtual environment that this is a system command for you to be allowed to download something. So it's a command function or keyword that's reserved. And the command here is rather simple. We're just going to do the exclamation mark followed by pip install virtual env. That'll take a couple of seconds to run. It looks like it took me about 5 seconds. Once we have the virtual environment package downloaded, we can actually use the virtual environment to we can actually use the virtual environment package to create a new environment. So what we do here is, again, we use that key reserved exclamation mark. And we're going to use the exclamation mark and then call on Python 3, or you can just say Python -m which basically means manual, and then virtual env, which is the name of the package that we're requesting. And then the last thing you do is specify the path to the new virtual environment that you want to create. So where do you want to store this thing? And in our case, I just want to store our virtual environment in the directory we're already in. So we're not going to provide it any path. We're just going to tell it what to call that environment, which in our case will be Django. So we'll run that. That one takes a little bit of time. It took about 23 seconds. The next thing we can do after we have the virtual environment installed and created is activate it. And to activate the virtual environment, we are again going to use that exclamation point, and then we're going to call in the source, and then we're going to tell it what it needs to do. So we need source to activate the Django environment and put it in bin and call on activate. So basically telling our processor to activate this specific environment that we have called on. So once we get through that, we have created a new environment for our Django packages and backend and framework to work off of. And we can find that environment over here on the far left side in our file folder. So if you look in this file folder, I have a couple more things than you probably have right now, but you should have this sample data folder as well as this up arrow folder, which just takes you back to all the content. If you want to get back out of this whole system format, you're going to go down right here to the content folder, and you'll see there's all of our content again. So when we created that Django virtual environment, we created this new folder in our content, in our notebook, and that is going to have your bin, your include, your library functions, all of the above for this specific environment that we're working on right now. Now, right now, we don't need to do anything with the Django environment, but just know any packages that you may install to build your portfolio apps will be saved in this Django environment here. So what we need to do next is create the Django project framework. So we've got our virtual environment established. We just need to download the Django package into the active virtual environment, which we started up above, and then we can start to build our apps off of that. And if you want to read the Django documentation before you get started, here's the link right here. It'll take you over to this page, and then I would recommend going to part 1 here on how to write your first application if you want a step-by-step view. So what we're going to do once we have Django installed, again, we're just going to call on pip install Django. Make sure you include your special character, your exclamation mark. After you've got Django installed, we're going to do what's called starting a new project. And starting a new project is very simple. We're just going to call on the exclamation mark, and we're going to say Django admin, which is a special function. And then we're going to say start project, and then we're going to name our project. So I said start project, and I called our project portfolio website. So you can call this whatever you want. These other two are key functions that you have to use. So now that we've started a new project, we should have a new folder in our project location, and we do. So in the content right here, this portfolio website is that new project that I just created. And inside of that portfolio website, you'll have another file that's called portfolio website. This portfolio website, inside of portfolio website, is the base app for your framework. So this portfolio website right here inside of the other directory is where all of your inits and your settings and your URLs for the entire application are going to get mapped to. So this is essentially your base directory for your website right here. Now, inside of this same portfolio website directory is where all of your other apps will get added to. So you'll see like down here I have the task manager folder, which is an application that gets mapped to the portfolio website and then is in my same portfolio website directory. So this whole thing right here is the total project that we are building. So once we've got that new project started and we've built this portfolio website, that's the name of the project, and we've created that new directory in our content folder here alongside our virtual environment, what we have to do is actually navigate into that portfolio website directory so that we can perform other actions and functions on it. So in order to do that in Colab, you're going to call on cd, which is change directory, and then you're going to name the directory you want to move to from your current directory. So you are currently in the content directory, and you're going to call cd portfolio underscore website /. And you'll see that once it runs that line, it tells you now you have moved into the /content /portfolio website directory. So you've now moved into this new portfolio website directory. Another option, if this CD alone does not work for you, sometimes Colab can be picky and you may need to add a shift 5 or the percentage sign there, and that percentage sign essentially is another reserved figure or another reserved figure with the CD function, which is a standard terminal function to allow you to switch between your directories in Colab. Now, once we've gotten inside of our new project folder, inside that portfolio website folder, what we want to do is look around and see what we have to work with at that point in time. So we're going to check what's in the working directory. And to do this, what we're going to call on is ls. ls just basically means list everything that's in the current directory. Again, ls by itself should work. If ls by itself does not work, you're going to add the exclamation mark at the beginning, which is telling it that it is a specific terminal command that you're trying to run. And what we see when we run this ls function is that we have two items in our project folder initially. We've got one file that's called manage.py, and we've got a second file that's called portfolio_website. Now this portfolio_website, if we go over here to our file directory and we open this portfolio_website is the base directory for the entire project. So when you start a new project up here with the start project function in the Django project, what happens is it not only starts that new project as a new directory in your current directory, it also starts a second file that has the exact same name that acts as the base directory for you to map all of your applications to for your entire framework. So inside of the second portfolio website file is where we have our init file, our ASGI, which has to do with our server settings, our regular settings file, and our URLs file to map all of our URLs from the other apps into our primary or base app. And then this directory also contains the manage.py file. And the manage.py file is the file that we call on anytime we want to update this project. So anytime I want to make any changes to the portfolio website project, I'm going to make a command like this that you see down here. I'm going to say Python or Python 3 manage.py and then whatever command I need. So start app or run server or make migrations, whatever it is. And you'll learn more about that as we use this more. But for now, we've gotten through phase 2 here. So we've actually downloaded our Django project framework. We've got the basic project started and outlined, and now what we're ready to do is start a new application. So we can actually attach apps at our own will or at our own desire to this base project that we built, the portfolio website. And so what we'll do is anytime we want to build a new feature to that website or to that project, what we're going to do is just start a new application. So we're going to come in here and say exclamation point, and then we're going to say Python 3 manage.py start app task manager, because the app we'll be building as our example here is a task manager or to-do list app. And so now we have our basic app directory that we can find in our file system. So what we're going to do is again go over to the file folder over here. We're going to open this directory and we are going to look in the content section. And in the content section, again, you'll see the Django virtual environment. You'll see the new portfolio website project that we just created. And inside of there, we have the portfolio website, which is the base of our website where all of our settings and functions will be mapped to. And then we've got the new task manager app that we just added to this project directly underneath the portfolio website. Okay, so that takes us through step 2. So now we've successfully set up a virtual environment. We've downloaded and created our basic Django project framework that has all of the built-in presets. And now we're actually at a point where we can start to build our app. Now with Django, you actually have a lot of flexibility and a lot of possible ways that you could be working on your app. So we have options on how to build this app. So for instance, if you are working on this project locally on your computer, you could build the entire project from the terminal. And you can do this simply by, as we were looking over here in our looking over here in our file folder, and our directory and navigating between files, you can do all that from the terminal, and you can edit those files as you need, save your changes, and repeat the process until your entire app's built. Or the other option is that you use a text editor, and a text editor could be something like Vim or VS Code. And in this case, just like what we're doing over here, where we're using a directory-based view or like essentially a development environment, we can go in here and select each of these forms from within those folders, and they'll pop up over here on the right. we can edit these, we can save them, and then continue to build the system and iterate over the system that way. So I typically go with the text-based editor option. It's easier for my brain to process. I also like to see multiple files at the same time. So like, for instance, I could open my URL files in the portfolio website, and then I also could open my URL files inside of the task manager app and have those at the same time to make sure they're mapping back and forth between each other. Okay, so that's a personal preference. I typically do recommend, though, if you're new, to use the text editor option. So for this build, we're going to be using option number 2. So as we go in to actually start to build our app, the first thing we want to do is just lay out our app. So we want to make sure that we have an idea of what the plan is, what our purpose of this app is, what are the pieces that we're going to have to build. And if we were taking a software engineering course, we would do this really well in depth and have documentation and graphs and diagrams and all kinds of stuff for the apps that we're building. But in this instance, we're building a portfolio website. And at this point, we can abstract and have some generalization about what the app is doing. So in our case, we are building an app that's going to allow us to manage tasks. So basically, we want to build a to-do list app that has multiple users available to it. So multiple people can log in and use it at the same time. And then as far as the components go, we want to have, we're going to have a bunch of different components. First off, we have to have a database, because if we have multiple users that are using the app at the same time, it needs to be able to go and select the data for that specific user, as well as update and gather and delete data as each user is using and finishing with that data. We're also going to have functions. These functions will then map to views, and then those views will map to URLs, which will then map to our web pages or our templates. So those are kind of our 5 key components here, and those line up very well with the layers that Django has built in. So for instance, the database layer is the models layer. The functions and the views go into the views.py file. The URLs are in the urls.py file. And then the web pages fall into the templates for each of the applications. And as far as our functions go, our functions are basically a description of what we possibly may want this app to do. And in our case, we're building a task manager. So we want to add new task when a new task comes up. If we have a previous task, we may want to update that task and say that this task is still incomplete or it has been finished, and we want to auto delete it. We need to be able to delete a task once it is completed, and then we also want to be able to gather a task from the database or from a table and pull it so that we can look at the task and look at the steps on that task. So with those 3 kind of key areas laid out, now we can start to build a plan of how we're going to move forward. So step 1, let's build the model. So let's know what kind of data we want to gather and collect and how we want to use it. Step 2, let's build the views. So how do we want to map the models or the data in our database onto views, and how can the person or the user interact with those views? 3, we're going to build the URLs. So just make sure that the views all map to a URL, and then that URL maps to the base URL for the entire website. 4, we're going to build the templates or the website pages, the actual web pages. 5, we're going to make migration. So we're going to migrate this new model and all of its pieces onto the website or onto the entire project, so then it is viewable to an external user. 6, we're going to test the functionality. 7, we're going to update the settings to publish the backend to a virtual machine. And then 8, we're going to deploy it on GitHub. So that's kind of our general plan. And again, this will be covered over the next 3 videos, including this one. So today the goal is we're going to build 3 key pieces. We're going to build the model. We're going to build our views that go with that model, and then we're going to build the URLs that map to the views, which map to our model. So we're going to get the 3 big core background parts done today. So let's get started building our model. So this is the layer of our Django system that basically holds a class or a definition or a database entry of some sort that will allow us to represent the type of data that we want to use, and any fields or options that we may want to be available for that class. So in our case, we want to create a class that's going to represent a task, and the fields that are going to go with that task go something like details or status, when it was created, that kind of information. And this will be the basis for our database. So what we're going to do is go over here on the far left hand side, and we're going to go down to our file directory. And then inside of our file directory, of course, we're in the content folder. In the content folder, we have our project directory, which is portfolio website. Under portfolio website, we've got our task manager app. So that's where we're going to be starting right now. And inside of the task manager app, we're going to be looking for the model.py. We're going to be looking for the model.py file. We're going to double click on that, open it up, and you can see I've already updated it, but we can delete all this and start writing over again. So you could either copy and paste the code I have here or write it yourself, and I'll write it myself real quick. So we're going to say from Django.db for database, import models. Models is just the general framework that Django has built in to allow you to have basic models to work with. And then we're also going to import date time. And the reason for that is because as we create tasks, we may be interested in having the creation date on the task, and it also may allow for analytics downstream if you want to see how quickly you're turning around tasks that you are working on. After we import the date time, what we're going to do is call on a class, and we're going to create a new class that's going to be called task, and task will be consistent of models.model. And then for this specific model, we're going to have two different set statuses. We're going to have a complete status and an incomplete status. If you wanted to update this section right here, you could also have partially complete or in progress. So this is basically setting up the different modes or steps that your project could be in. But because we're just doing a to-do list, incomplete and complete is good enough. So we'll have one object that we'll call complete, and complete will be equal to the string complete. And then we'll have a second object that we'll call incomplete. And incomplete will be equal to the string incomplete. And then we're going to create a new list, which will be called the status of the task. And that status will be equal to either complete or incomplete. So this is basically mapping complete and incomplete to an object within that class, which in this case is the status of the task that needs to be completed. So we'll call on the first one by just putting some parentheses in there and then writing the word complete. And then we're going to tell the computer that the complete is equal to the word complete, or the input complete. There's another way that you could do this where we could map complete and incomplete to true and false, or some kind of Boolean, and that may be simpler, but it's also another thing for you to keep track of, because you'd have to remember if complete is true or incomplete is false. But just another option, and just to let you know that there's always a million ways to do the same thing. And I do see I have an arrow over here. If you'll notice on the outside, I accidentally put two parentheses there for both incomplete and complete. And these are actually supposed to be tuples. So complete should have its own ending parentheses, and incomplete should have its own ending parentheses. All right, so that's it for the status. Now we're going to tell it we're going to create some more information that goes with this class. So more options or fields that the user can fill in. So one of them will be detail, and detail will just be equal to model.char field or character field, and we're going to tell it how many. And then within character field, we're going to tell the computer how many characters it's allowed to take in. In this instance, we can do 200 character fields. We're going to say null, as in can the detail column be left blank? In our case, false. If you want it to be left blank or an option, you can make it true. And then we'll also have another field that's called blank. So can it be completely blank, no information or anything in it at all? And that'll also be false. Then we're going to call in the status. The status again will be equal to models.char field. So this is just a character field that a user can fill out. We're going to tell it the max length again is going to be equal to 200. And then we're going to tell it that it has choices available to it. And these choices are the status that we created up above. So the user for the status field can either choose that a task is complete or incomplete, as we had previously defined. And then we're going to set a default function for this field, which will be the incomplete status. So we're going to say that anytime somebody creates a new task, it always says incomplete until the user marks it complete. Next up, we're going to create a category for each task. So category will be equal to models.charField. So again, just another character field. And then we're going to tell it the max length of the object that it can take in. In our case, it is 200. And then we're going to say default is equal to none, as in there's not any more information about the category. We're just asking the user if they would like to provide a category for each of the tasks that they're adding. Okay, now we're going to add the last section, which will be the creation date. The creation date is exactly why we added in the datetime object up above. And the creation date will be equal to models.datetime field. And datetime field will be called the creation date. And we're going to set the default value of the creation date to always be now, as in the time at this instance. And if it gives you an error, it might need datetime.now. There we go. So datetime.now is the correct setting there. And that's it. That's our model. So this is the basis for all of the information that we think we're going to want to collect from our users. So we think we're going to need to know the status, the details about the task that they want to add to the list, the category of the task that it may fall of each task, and what category it might fall in, and then the creation date of each task. And so once you've got that, you're just going to go Control S, and honestly, it probably auto-saved it for you, but just to be safe, and we'll close that. So that's phase one of building our pipeline, or our Django project here, is building the models. Next up, what we're going to do is move to phase two, which is building the views. Now, the views are more complex, just in the fact that we have more to get done here. So this is the layer where we're going to allow the users to update, add new tasks, delete tasks, gather tasks from the table, so on and so forth. And then the views are the point where each of those functions or requests that the users makes has to map into a HTML template, or it has to map into a markdown file, so that anytime they click on and perform some kind of option or some kind of task or function and mark one of those fields as complete or incomplete, that the view updates and they then go to the next screen with the updated table and the updated information. So that's what we're going to build next. So now what we're going to do, again, is go into our portfolio website here, go down to our task manager. Inside of the task manager app, we're going to look for the file called views.py. Now, views.py in this instance is a much longer document. I'm not going to type this by hand, but we can go over some of the logic here. So the first thing that we're going to do, as always, is import whatever items that we need. So in this case, we're going to import from Django.shortcuts import render. Render is the function that basically renders an HTML document. And then from HTTP, we are going to import HTTP response redirect. So whenever this function basically allows, as soon as somebody submits a document, they get redirected to another site or another position in the website. And then HTTP response just allows you to respond to a request from the user. And then on top of those imports, we are going to build some functions. We've got our index function. This is basically our home screen, our home page for the application. We're going to have the add function, which is where we can take a request from user, post it, have them define the information that they need, and then send them to back to the home screen or back to their base screen, while also updating that information in our database. Then we're going to have the delete function. The delete does exactly what it says. It's going to delete the task that the user has asked us to delete. Then we're going to have the update function, where if somebody needs to update the details or the category of their information on the screen, they can do that. All that gets updated in our database. And then we also have get task. Get task is your generic function that will allow you to go from the index into the get task screen, so they can pull or request the information about a specific task and then pull it back up on the home screen. So again, we're not going to go super into the details on this. You're welcome to copy and paste this code as you'd like, or also update it and build your own app as you see fit. And as we go through here, there will be some things that we update on this. Like, for instance, I do not like this structure where people write return HTTP response redirect reverse. Doesn't make any sense to redirect and to reverse something that you've previously done. So you can split this either into 2 lines, or you could get rid of the redirect and just use a regular response. So as we go through this, we'll update the code, make it more functional, make it match our style more. And I should have mentioned earlier that our app base build is available right here at the top of the layout for the app section. So you can click on this and view the app that we started with today. Like I said, we always start with a base and then build up from there. So you can just see what the other person had started with if you'd like. Now, once you get the views done, you've basically built your model and you've built the capability for someone to interact with that model. But now what we need to do is actually map these views onto the URLs so that someone could type in the address to your website as a URL and get access to this app that you're building. And so to do that, we'll move on to section 3 of our document, which is about building the URL. So this is the layer where we build the URL paths between the task app and the main system, as well as the functions as the view and the views of the apps. So to get to this file, what we're going to do is actually come over here to the file folder. We're going to go into the portfolio website directory again, and then we do need to make updates to the portfolio website, the main or base app, but we'll worry about that in our next session. For now, we're going to work on building the urls.py file for the Task Manager app. And in the Task Manager app, the urls.py file is not going to come built in as a default. So what you need to do is right click on the Task Manager app, and you're going to click on New File. And you're going to name that new file urls.py. And then you're going to hit enter. And then once you've got that new file created, you're going to click on it and open it. And in this new file, you can add the text that we have here. And we'll walk through this real quick. So the first line right here says from Django.urls import path. Django.urls is a sub package that allows us to have path mapping. So we can just import the path object. Next, we're going to import dot, which basically means from all or from the current app that you are inside of. And then we're going to tell it what we want it to import. So we're going to say from dot import views. So from task manager import the views. And then we're going to tell it the name of the app. You do not have to do this line. This is a personal syntax preference. Instead of naming the app here, you could say from task manager dot views import, and then whatever the name of the function would be. And we've practiced that before. But for now, what we're going to do is leave this as app name equals task. And in our case, it's actually task manager, but we'll get to that later. And then after that is where you can actually start to specify your URL paths. So the first path we typically leave as being blank. And the reason for that is because you want somebody to be able to call on your specific name of your website. So like in this instance, if we're building a to-do list app, if we just call it todo.com, we want someone to be able to write todo.com, not todo.com/home. Okay, so leaving this first set of parentheses, or this first set of quotations blank right here, allows you to call on the index function inside of your views.py. Next, we need a path for the add. The add is the function that allows a user to add a task to the list. So they call on add /, that'll be an automatic redirect, and that'll send them to the views.add, so the function inside of the views. And the name of that is going to be add. Same thing for update, same thing for delete, same thing for get task. And then as always, before we finish off this, we want to go control save, make sure urls.py saves, close that out, and there we go. So that is it. It's that simple to start creating your own website in very little time and with very little effort. And this is a very robust framework for building websites. So a Django framework can do almost anything and everything that you could think of. You can add caching, you can add geolocation, you can add high-level security, you can add specific signatures for every user. So Django is what many things are built on, like Facebook and Instagram. They have Django backends that connect to all the other programming languages, features, and functions that they need to run those major applications. And so these are the first couple of steps that we need to take. In our next session, we're going to continue on our layout, and we're going to get through building our templates, making our migrations, and testing the functionality. And then in our third session, we're going to do our settings updates and sending all of our Django system onto a back-end virtual machine, and then finally deploying it to GitHub. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this session. I hope you have a great day and an even better rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.